The overnight flight from Chicago to London carried 243 passengers through the darkness above the Atlantic Ocean. Most of them slept beneath thin airline blankets, their faces lit blue by the glow of seatback screens playing movies no one was watching. In seat 8A, a black man in a rumpled gray sweater dozed with his head against the cold oval window, his reflection a ghost against the endless night sky beyond. No one noticed him. No one looked twice. He was just another tired traveler, invisible in the quiet hum of 37,000 feet above the black water below. Then, the captain's voice crackled through the cabin speakers, urgent and unmistakable. If anyone on board had combat flight experience, they needed to identify themselves to the crew immediately. The cabin stirred, heads lifted from pillows. Eyes darted nervously. The man in seat 8A opened his eyes. His name was Marcus Cole. He was 38 years old, a software engineer for a logistics company headquartered in downtown Chicago. His apartment was a modest two-bedroom in Rogers Park, small but clean, with a view of the elevated train tracks that rattled past every 15 minutes throughout the night. The rent was $1,800 a month, and he paid it on time, every single time, because that was what responsible fathers did. His daughter Zoe was 7 years old. She had her mother's wide brown eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she believed with absolute certainty that her daddy could fix anything in the entire world. A broken bicycle chain, a math problem about fractions that made no sense to her. The way her heart hurt sometimes when she thought about her mother, who had died in a car accident when Zoe was only 3. Marcus had built his entire life around that little girl. Every decision he made, every sacrifice, every quiet compromise traced directly back to her. He took the job at the logistics company because it offered stability and comprehensive health insurance. He turned down the promotion that would have required 70-hour weeks and constant travel. He scheduled his business trips only when absolutely necessary. And even then, he called her every single night before bedtime without fail. Tonight, before boarding at O'Hare International Airport, he had recorded a voice message for her to wake up to in the morning. "Hey baby girl, Daddy's on the plane now. I'll be home in 2 days, okay? You be good for Grandma. I love you bigger than the sky." She always laughed at that phrase. Bigger than the sky. It had started when she was 4 years old, when she asked him how much he loved her, and he had pointed up at the endless blue above them and said those exact words. Now it was their special thing, their secret language, their way of saying everything that truly mattered between them. He had been thinking about her face when he fell asleep somewhere over Newfoundland. Now, with the captain's urgent announcement still echoing through the cabin, he thought about her again. She was the reason he had left the United States Air Force 8 years ago. She was the reason he had given up everything he loved about flying. It had not been an easy decision. He had loved flying more than he had ever loved anything in his life, except for her. The F-16 Fighting Falcon had been his cathedral, the cramped cockpit his confession booth, the endless sky his only true religion. He had logged over 1,500 hours in combat aircraft, had flown dangerous missions over Iraq and Afghanistan, had earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for a night extraction mission that still appeared in his dreams. But then Sarah died. A car accident on an icy highway in December. Sudden and final. The phone call came at 3 a.m, and by sunrise, everything he knew had collapsed. Suddenly, he was a single father with a 3-year-old daughter who kept asking when Mommy was coming home, and a military career that sent him halfway around the world for months at a time. He could not be both things anymore. He could not be a warrior and a father, so he made his choice. He remembered the day he told Zoe he was leaving the Air Force, even though she was far too young to understand. He had held her in his lap in their small living room and told her that Daddy was not going to fly the big planes anymore. Daddy was going to stay home with her instead. She had looked up at him with those wide brown eyes, her mother's eyes, and asked him why. Did he not like the sky anymore? He had felt something break inside his chest, some essential piece of himself that he carefully buried and never looked at again. "I like you more," he had told her. "I like you more than anything in the whole world." Now, on this commercial aircraft, surrounded by strangers who looked through him like he was made of glass, that buried piece stirred. A flight attendant hurried past his row, her face pale beneath professional composure. A businessman across the aisle gripped his armrest with white knuckles. Somewhere behind him, an elderly woman whispered a prayer in Spanish. Marcus looked out the window at the impenetrable darkness beyond. Then he looked at his phone, at the last photograph he had taken of Zoe, her gap-toothed grin bright against the backdrop of their small kitchen. He had promised her he would come home safely. He had promised. The captain's voice returned through the speakers, more strained and urgent this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to be more specific about our situation. We have experienced a critical malfunction in our flight control systems. If anyone on board has experienced flying aircraft manually, particularly in military or combat aviation, we need you to make yourself known to the cabin crew immediately. Time is of the essence." The words hung in the recycled cabin air like smoke. Around Marcus, passengers began to shift and murmur anxiously, their earlier drowsiness replaced by the sharp edge of genuine fear. A baby started crying somewhere in the back of the aircraft. A man in first class stood up and looked around the cabin, clearly expecting someone else to volunteer first. Marcus felt his heart rate climb steadily. He recognized exactly what the captain was describing, the careful phrasing designed to minimize panic while communicating the gravity of the situation. A critical malfunction in flight control systems. Manual flying required. Combat experience preferred. This was not a simple hydraulic leak or a minor autopilot malfunction. This was the kind of cascading system failure that killed experienced pilots and their passengers. He had seen it happen once before, during his second deployment to the Middle East. An F-16 had gone down over the Iraqi desert, its pilot unable to recover from a catastrophic system failure that stripped away every safety net, every backup, every margin for error. The wreckage had scattered across 3 miles of sand dunes. They never found all the pieces of the aircraft. They never found all the pieces of the pilot. The memory rose unbidden, and with it came the cold, analytical clarity that had once made him one of the best pilots in his squadron. His mind began to catalog the possibilities automatically. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner, based on the cabin configuration and window shape. A fly-by-wire flight control system, meaning all controls were entirely electronic with no direct mechanical linkage between the pilot's inputs and the aircraft's control surfaces. If the flight computers failed, if the redundant systems cascaded, this plane would become a 200-ton brick falling through the sky toward the black ocean below. But there were manual override systems. There were always manual overrides, if you knew exactly where to find them, if you had the training to use them, if you could keep your hands steady while the world fell apart around you. He knew where to find them. A white man in his 50s stood up 3 rows ahead of Marcus, waving his hand enthusiastically like a schoolboy seeking the teacher's attention. He announced loudly that he was a pilot, a private pilot specifically. He had his license and everything. A flight attendant hurried toward him, relief flickering across her face. But Marcus watched the exchange with growing unease. A private pilot. Someone who flew single-engine Cessnas on sunny weekend afternoons, who had never experienced a single-engine flameout at altitude, let alone a total flight control failure at cruise altitude over the Atlantic Ocean. The man was talking confidently, gesturing with his hands. He mentioned his flight hours, his certifications, his membership in a flying club in Connecticut. He did not mention combat experience. He did not mention manual reversion procedures. He did not mention any of the specific skills this emergency required. The flight attendant nodded politely, then excused herself to consult with the cockpit. Marcus closed his eyes. Zoe's face appeared immediately in the darkness behind his eyelids. Her beautiful smile, her laugh, the way she said the word daddy when she was sleepy, stretching it into 2 syllables. If he did nothing, if he stayed in his seat and let someone else try, he might survive. The private pilot might get lucky. The crew might find another solution, or they might all die together in the dark water below. The flight attendant returned to the white man and shook her head apologetically. His qualifications were not sufficient. He sat down heavily, deflated, and the fear in the cabin thickened like fog. Marcus thought about the promise he had made to Zoe, the promise to always come home. But he had made another promise too, a long time ago, in a ceremony at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. He had promised to protect and defend. He had spent 8 years telling himself that promise was over, that his duty now was only to his daughter. He was not sure he believed that anymore. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt with steady hands. He rose slowly to his feet, feeling the eyes of the entire cabin turning toward him, the weight of their attention pressing against his skin. He raised his hand. "I can help." His voice came out quieter than intended. He cleared his throat and spoke again. "I'm a former combat pilot, United States Air Force. 1,500 hours in F-16 fighting Falcons. I've dealt with flight control failures before." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the calculations of 242 people deciding whether to trust a black man in a wrinkled gray sweater. A flight attendant approached him, a young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read Jennifer. Her expression was careful and controlled, but Marcus could see the fear beneath it, and something else. Something that looked like doubt. She asked if he had any identification, military ID or pilot's license. No. He kept his tone even. "I separated from the Air Force 8 years ago. I don't carry military credentials anymore. There's no reason to." She hesitated, her eyes moving over his appearance, taking in the rumpled sweater, the faded jeans, the unremarkable appearance of a man who looked nothing like the heroes in recruitment posters. She started to say that, without verification, she appreciated him coming forward, but Marcus cut her off quietly. "The plane is experiencing a cascading flight control failure. Based on the captain's announcement, you've lost at least 2 of 3 redundant flight control computers. The fly-by-wire system is degrading, which means your pilots are running out of options. If the 3rd computer fails, you'll have no electronic flight control at all. Your only chance is manual reversion to the standby flight control module, which requires specific training that civilian pilots don't receive." Jennifer's face went pale. Behind her, a passenger whispered, just loud enough to carry, "He doesn't look like a pilot." Marcus did not turn around. He had heard variations of that sentence his entire life. He had learned to let the words pass through him, to prove himself through action rather than argument. A woman stood up in the row behind Jennifer. She was in her mid-40s, with silver-streaked hair and the calm demeanor of someone accustomed to crisis. She introduced herself as Dr. Alicia Monroe. She said she had been listening to this man's assessment. She knew nothing about flying, but she knew something about how people respond under pressure. He was not panicking. He was not grandstanding. He was analyzing the situation systematically. She looked at Jennifer. That's what trained professionals do. Another passenger spoke up, a heavy-set white man in an expensive polo shirt. "This is ridiculous. You can't just let some random guy into the cockpit because he says he knows what he's doing. There have to be protocols." Marcus kept his voice calm. "The protocols are designed for normal emergencies. This isn't normal. If I'm right about what's happening up there, your pilots have maybe 20 minutes before they lose all flight control. You can spend those 20 minutes debating my credentials, or you can let me try to help." Dr. Monroe asked his name. Marcus Cole. She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "I believe you." The words shifted something in the cabin. Not everyone, but enough. Jennifer lifted the intercom handset and called the flight deck. The response was immediate. "Bring him now." A man stepped into the aisle, blocking Marcus's path forward. He was tall and lean, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades following military orders. He said he was not letting anyone near that cockpit without verification. He was Navy, 22 years. He knew what real military looked like. and he knew what pretenders looked like. Marcus met his gaze without flinching. Then, test me. The former Navy man studied him for a long moment. He asked what the procedure was for manual reversion in a flight control failure. Marcus answered without hesitation. Depends on the aircraft. In an F-16, you engage the standby flight control system through the FLCS panel, then verify hydraulic pressure and stick response before attempting any maneuvers. In a commercial fly-by-wire aircraft like a 787, the process is different, but the principle is the same. You're bypassing the primary computers and routing control through a simplified backup system with reduced authority. The veteran asked what the minimum safe airspeed was for controlled flight in a 787 with degraded systems. Clean configuration, approximately 200 knots indicated. But if we've lost flight computers, we won't have accurate airspeed readings either, so you fly by pitch attitude and power setting instead. The veteran's expression shifted. He asked what a Glock was and how you recover from it. G-induced loss of consciousness. Common in high-performance aircraft during aggressive maneuvering. Recovery depends on altitude. If you have altitude, you unload the aircraft and let blood flow return to the brain. If you don't have altitude, you're dead. Marcus paused. But that's not relevant here. This is a passenger jet, not a fighter. The veteran was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped aside. He's real. Take him up. As Marcus passed, the older man caught his arm. Good luck, and I'm sorry. Marcus understood. The man was not apologizing for the test. He was apologizing for the doubt. Thank you, Marcus said, and then he walked toward the cockpit. The cockpit of a Boeing 787 was a symphony of glass and light, a curved dashboard of touchscreens and digital displays. But right now, half of those screens were dark or flickering, and the air smelled of burnt plastic and fear. The captain was slumped in the left seat, unconscious. A flight attendant was pressing a cloth to a wound on his forehead, blood seeping through the white fabric. The first officer, a young man who could not have been older than 30, was gripping the control yoke with both hands, his knuckles white. Marcus asked what happened. The first officer was Ryan Cho. He explained that the captain hit his head during a turbulence event. They were already dealing with the flight control computers when the plane dropped unexpectedly. The captain was not strapped in. Marcus scanned the instrument panel with practiced eyes. 2 of the 3 flight control computers showed red failure lights. The third was flickering between amber and green, fighting to maintain control of an aircraft slowly slipping away. He checked the captain's pulse and pupils. Steady pulse, reactive but uneven pupils. Possible concussion, maybe worse. He told Ryan they had a bigger problem right now. He asked him to walk through what happened with the computers. Ryan's hands trembled on the yoke. It started about 40 minutes ago with a caution message on the number 2 computer. Standard procedure was to monitor and continue. Then number 1 failed. The captain started running through the emergency checklist, but before he could finish, they hit severe turbulence. His head struck the overhead panel. Marcus nodded. Now you're on a single computer. It's degrading. Ryan's voice cracked. I can feel it in the controls. The response is getting sluggish and unpredictable. I don't know how much longer it's going to hold. Marcus studied the displays. Hydraulic pressure normal, fuel adequate, engines green. The problem was purely in the flight control system. He asked if Ryan had tried manual reversion. Ryan shook his head. The checklist says it's a last resort. I've never done it outside of a simulator. It's not a last resort anymore. It's the only resort. Marcus pointed to a panel on the center pedestal. That's the standby flight control module. When you engage it, you're bypassing all 3 computers and routing control through a simplified analog system. You'll lose autopilot, auto-throttle, and most automated protections. But you'll have direct control of the aircraft. Ryan stared at the panel. What if it doesn't work? Then we're no worse off than we are now. But it's going to work. I've done this before. In an F-16? In an F-16. And in simulators for other aircraft types. The principle is the same. Trust your training. Trust your hands. Ryan took a breath. Outside the windows, only darkness. No horizon. No reference points. Only the Atlantic Ocean, 37,000 feet below. Marcus guided him through step by step, his voice low and even. Disengage the autopilot. Confirm hydraulic pressure. Arm the standby flight control module. Verify the warning lights. When Ryan hesitated over the final switch, Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. You've got this. Just fly the airplane. Ryan flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the yoke went loose, disconnected, dead. The aircraft shuddered, and Marcus felt his stomach lurch as they dropped 100 feet in a heartbeat. Then, the standby system engaged. The yoke stiffened, responding again. Ryan pulled back gently, and the nose came up. The aircraft steadied. It's working, Ryan breathed. Oh my God, it's working. Marcus allowed himself one moment of relief. Then he turned to the displays. We need to divert. What's our nearest suitable airport? Ryan checked the navigation display. Iceland, Keflavik, about 2 hours at current speed. Can we make it? I don't know. The standby system isn't designed for extended flight. And we don't know what else might fail. Marcus nodded. Then we go to Keflavik. In the main cabin, 242 passengers waited in the grip of fear. Word had spread quickly after Marcus disappeared into the cockpit. Some passengers prayed, their lips moving silently in languages from every corner of the earth. Others gripped armrests and stared at nothing, their minds racing through the mathematics of mortality. A few tried to maintain normalcy, scrolling through movies they were not watching. Dr. Alicia Monroe moved through the aisles, offering what comfort she could. She had no authority here, no official role, but she understood that in moments of crisis, the simple presence of someone calm could keep panic at bay. A man in first class was not interested in calm. His name was Carter Whitfield, and he had spent the flight drinking bourbon and complaining about modern air travel. Now his complaints had curdled into something uglier. He said loudly that this was unbelievable. They let some random guy into the cockpit. Some guy off the street. Jennifer approached him. She explained the passenger had been verified as a former military pilot. Verified by who? Another passenger? Carter laughed. I've been flying first class for 30 years. I know how these airlines work. They'll say anything to keep people calm while the plane goes down. Dr. Monroe stepped forward. The man in that cockpit knows what he's doing. I watched him explain the emergency to the crew. He understood things none of us could have known, Carter sneered. You watched him. Lady, watching isn't the same as knowing. For all you know, he learned that stuff from a YouTube video. He served in the Air Force. He flew combat missions, so he says. And you just believed him? Carter's voice rose. A black guy in coach, claiming to be a fighter pilot? Come on. Use your head. The words landed in the cabin like a slap. For a moment, no one spoke. The accusation hung in the air, naked and ugly. Not a suggestion. A statement of pure prejudice. Dr. Monroe's face went cold. His skin color has nothing to do with his qualifications. Through the partially open cockpit door, over the intercom that had been left active, Marcus heard every word. His hands did not tremble. His focus did not waver. He had learned long ago that the opinions of men like Carter Whitfield were irrelevant to the task at hand. The only thing that mattered was this aircraft, these passengers, the sacred responsibility of bringing them safely back to Earth. But somewhere deep inside him, something hardened. Ryan, he said quietly, we have a new problem. Ryan looked up. What? Hydraulic pressure is dropping. Slowly, but it's dropping. We're losing fluid somewhere in the system. Ryan checked the display. The backup reservoirs should hold for at least another 3 hours. At normal usage, yes. But the standby system is less efficient. It's working the hydraulics harder. Marcus did the calculation in his head. At this rate, we'll be below minimum pressure in about 90 minutes. Maybe less. That's not enough time to reach Keflavik. No, it's not. In the cabin, Jennifer had managed to guide Carter back to his seat. Dr. Monroe stood in the aisle, hands shaking with suppressed anger. The intercom crackled. Ryan's voice came through, steadier now. They were diverting to Keflavik International Airport in Iceland. They expected to begin descent in approximately 1 hour. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. The situation was under control. Dr. Monroe noticed the tremor in his voice, the careful omission of details. The situation was not under control. In the cockpit, Marcus made a decision. "Ryan, I need to take the controls." Ryan looked at him with surprise and relief. "You want to fly?" "I need to fly. The hydraulic loss is going to make the controls increasingly heavy and unresponsive." "You've never flown like that." "I have." Ryan hesitated. Every regulation, every procedure, every rule told him this was wrong. A passenger should not be flying a commercial aircraft. But he could feel the yoke getting heavier in his hands. He could see the hydraulic pressure gauge dropping toward red. He thought about his wife, pregnant with their first child, waiting for him in London. He thought about the 242 passengers behind him. "Okay, you have the aircraft." Marcus settled into the captain's seat, his hands finding the yoke with the familiarity of a musician returning to his instrument. The Boeing 787 was larger and heavier than any fighter he had ever flown, but the fundamentals were the same: stick and rudder, pitch and power. The eternal conversation between human will and physical law. "I have the aircraft," he confirmed. He allowed himself to feel it. The weight of the machine around him, the lives depending on his skill, the darkness pressing against the windows. He had given this up. He had walked away from the sky to be a father, but the sky had never left him. He thought of Zoe, asleep in her bed in Chicago. He had promised to come home. "I'm going to keep that promise," he whispered, so quietly that Ryan could not hear. Then he turned his attention to the instruments and began to fly. The descent began 30 minutes later, earlier than planned. Marcus had calculated their options with cold precision. They would reach Iceland, but barely. There would be no margin for error, no second chances. The Atlantic Ocean stretched below them, invisible in the darkness but present in every pilot's awareness. If they went down here, there would be no rescue. The water temperature would kill them in minutes. Marcus did not think about the water. He thought about angles and airspeeds, about the feel of the controls, about the subtle language of an aircraft telling its pilot what it needed. "Hydraulic pressure at 60%, Ryan reported. "Understood." 55%. "Understood." The controls were heavy now, requiring real physical effort to move. Marcus felt the strain in his shoulders, his forearms, his back. He was fighting the aircraft, wrestling it toward safety through sheer force of will. 50%. "Marcus, that's the minimum for normal operations. This isn't normal operations. We fly until we can't fly anymore." Ryan stared at him. "How can you be so calm?" Marcus was thinking about Zoe, about the voice message he had left her. "I have a daughter. She's 7. She's waiting for me to come home. I have a baby on the way," Ryan said quietly. "First one. We don't even know if it's a boy or girl yet. Then we both have reasons to land this plane." Ryan nodded slowly. "Yeah, we do." The coast of Iceland appeared on the navigation display. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. 45% hydraulic pressure. "We're below minimum. Contact Keflavik approach. Tell them we're declaring an emergency. We need the longest runway they have, full emergency services, and a lot of luck." Ryan made the call while Marcus flew, his hands moving constantly, making 1,000 tiny adjustments to keep the aircraft stable. "Keflavik clears us for runway 28. Emergency services standing by." They're asking about fuel state and passenger count. Tell them fuel is adequate. Passengers are 243, including crew. Tell them we have an incapacitated captain who needs immediate medical attention. And tell them this landing is going to look unusual. We're coming in fast and shallow because I don't trust the hydraulics for a normal approach. Ryan relayed the information. The response came back immediately. They understood. They were clearing the runway. Good. Now strap in tight. This is going to be rough. In the cabin, the passengers felt the descent as a change in pressure. Jennifer moved through the aisles, checking seatbelts. Carter Whitfield had finally fallen silent, his earlier bravado replaced by pale stillness. "Doctor," Monroe sat with her eyes closed, her lips moving silently. Ryan's voice came through the speakers. They were beginning final approach into Keflavik International Airport. Please ensure seatbelts were securely fastened. Emergency lighting would activate automatically in the event of power disruption. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing. Everyone understood. This was not a normal landing. The first lights of Iceland appeared through the darkness. The runway was a stripe of brightness lined with emergency vehicle flashes. Marcus took a breath. He had done everything he could. Now there was nothing left but the landing itself. 35% hydraulic pressure, Ryan said. "Marcus, the controls are barely responding." "I know." "We're committed. There's no going around. What do you need me to do?" "Call out the altitude, every 100 feet below 1,000. And when I tell you to brace, hit the PA and tell everyone." "Got it." The runway rushed toward them. Marcus held the aircraft in a shallow descent, fighting every instinct that told him to flare, to slow down. He needed the speed. Without hydraulic pressure, the control surfaces had almost no authority. 1,000 feet. The runway lights were blinding after the darkness. Marcus could see foam trucks, ambulances, emergency personnel prepared for the worst. 900 feet. The aircraft shuddered. Marcus corrected with a touch of rudder, a nudge of aileron. 800 feet. He could see the threshold now, white stripes marking the beginning of the runway. 700 feet. The controls went heavy, almost immovable. Marcus pushed harder, his muscles screaming. 600 feet. He made a decision. A technique from the Air Force called military power landing, designed for battle-damaged aircraft. He had never tried it in a civilian plane. 500 feet. He held the speed, held the shallow angle, held the aircraft in a descent that would have failed any civilian check ride. 400 feet. The threshold passed beneath them. 300 feet. 200 feet. "Brace. Tell them to brace." Ryan hit the PA. "Brace for impact. Brace for impact. Brace for impact." 100 feet. Marcus pulled back on the yoke with everything he had. The nose came up slowly, reluctantly, fighting him every inch. 50 feet. The main gear touched. The aircraft bounced once, twice, then settled onto the concrete with a shriek of rubber. Marcus slammed the thrust reversers to maximum. The engines roared. The aircraft shook violently. The end of the runway was coming fast. Marcus stood on the brakes. The hydraulic system screamed its final protest, and the aircraft began to slow. 8,000 feet remaining. 6,000. 4,000. 2,000. 1,000. The aircraft slowed to a crawl, then stopped. Absolute silence. Marcus sat in the captain's seat, his hands still on the yoke, his heart pounding. The runway stretched behind them, marked by black streaks. Emergency vehicles were already surrounding the aircraft. They had made it. Against every odd, against every calculation, against the slow death of systems that should have killed them, they had made it. In the cabin, the silence broke into a wave of sound. People crying, laughing, praying, strangers embracing each other. The release of terror into relief, of despair into gratitude. Dr. Monroe was weeping openly, her professional composure shattered. The Navy veteran sat pale but peaceful, the tension finally draining from his body. Carter Whitfield sat motionless, staring at nothing. the words he had spoken hanging over him like a judgment. Jennifer pushed through the chaos toward the cockpit. She found Marcus still in the captain's seat, still holding the yoke. "Everyone is okay," she said through tears. "Everyone is okay." Marcus closed his eyes. In the darkness, he saw Zoe's face. "I'm coming home, baby girl," he whispered. "I'm coming home." The evacuation was orderly. Passengers filed down emergency stairs onto the tarmac where buses waited. Medical personnel rushed toward the cockpit, where the captain was being moved to a stretcher. Marcus stepped out of the aircraft last. The cold Icelandic air hit him sharp and clean. A crowd of airline officials and emergency responders waited at the bottom of the stairs. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with confusion. A black man in a gray sweater, emerging from the cockpit of a commercial airliner. But Ryan was beside him, explaining what had happened, describing the decisions Marcus had made, the skills he had demonstrated. "He did what no one else could have done," Ryan said. "He flew that plane when it was barely flyable. He landed it when landing should have been impossible." An airline official stepped forward, extending his hand. On behalf of the airline and everyone on that flight, he expressed deepest gratitude. Marcus shook the offered hand. As he walked toward the terminal, he passed the passengers he had saved. Some reached out to touch his arm. A woman pressed a rosary into his palm. A man simply nodded, respect shining in his eyes. And then there was Carter Whitfield. He stood apart from the others, his face gray and drawn, his bluster completely extinguished. When Marcus approached, Carter did not look away. "I owe you an apology. What I said up there was wrong, ignorant and cruel. It could have gotten people killed if they had listened to me instead of trusting you." Marcus studied him for a long moment. He could have said many things. He could have pointed out the irony, the injustice, the long history of assumptions. But he was tired, and he had a phone call to make. "Thank you," he said simply. "Learn from it." He walked away before Carter could respond. Inside the terminal, Marcus found a quiet corner. His phone battery was low, but there was enough for one call. Zoe answered on the third ring. "Daddy?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "Grandma said there was something on the news." "I'm okay, baby girl. Daddy's okay. I'm in Iceland. There was some trouble with the plane, but everyone is safe now." "Iceland?" "That's where the Vikings came from. We learned about it in school." "That's right." He laughed through tears. "That's exactly right. When are you coming home, Daddy?" "Soon. Very soon. I just had to take a little detour." She was quiet for a moment. "Daddy, were you scared?" He thought about standing up in that cabin, about the cockpit, the failing systems, the darkness outside the windows, about the landing, a little bit. "But I had something to come home to. I had you. I'm glad you were there, Daddy. I'm glad you helped the people." "Me too, baby girl, me too." He stayed on the phone until she fell asleep again. Then he sat alone, watching the Icelandic dawn break through the windows. Dr. Monroe found him there an hour later with 2 cups of coffee. "I've been a doctor for 20 years, she said. "I've seen people at their worst and their best. I've never seen anything like what you did tonight. I just did what I was trained to do." "No." She shook her head. "You did more than that. You stood up when everyone was looking through you. You proved yourself to people who should never have doubted you. You saved 243 lives despite everything working against you. That's not training, that's character." Marcus did not know how to respond. He had spent so long being invisible, being overlooked, being assumed to be less than he was, but tonight had changed something. He had faced the sky again, and the sky had welcomed him back. She asked if she could ask him something. Of course, that man on the plane. Did it hurt? Marcus considered the question. It used to. When I was younger, words like that would cut me deep. I would lie awake wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong. And now? Now I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. I don't need anyone's permission to be excellent." He paused. "But it still stings sometimes, not because I doubt myself, but because I wish my daughter wouldn't have to face the same doubt." Dr. Monroe nodded slowly. "Your daughter is lucky to have you as a father. I'm the lucky one." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun rose over the volcanic Icelandic landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded Marcus of all the sunrises he had witnessed from 30,000 feet back when the sky was his home. Later that day, after the debriefings and interviews and endless paperwork, Marcus finally boarded a flight back to the United States. The airline had upgraded him to first class, a small gesture of gratitude that felt strange after everything that had happened. He slept for most of the flight, a deep and dreamless sleep that his exhausted body desperately needed. Zoe was waiting at the airport in Chicago, held in her grandmother's arms, bouncing with excitement. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy!" He dropped his bag and ran to her, sweeping her up, holding her so tightly she squeaked. "Daddy, you're squishing me." "I know." He did not let go. "I know." His mother watched them with tears streaming down her face. She had seen the news, had spent the entire night in agonized uncertainty, had prayed harder than she had prayed since her husband passed away 15 years ago. "My boy," she said, her voice breaking. "My brave, brave boy." That night, after dinner and bedtime stories and the long ritual of tucking Zoe in, Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, watching her sleep. He thought about the promise he had made 8 years ago, the promise to give up the sky, to be the father she needed. He had kept that promise. For 8 long years, he had kept it faithfully and completely. He had traded wings for stability, adventure for safety, the thrill of the sky for the quiet joy of bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes, and watching his daughter grow into the person she was meant to be. But tonight, he understood something he had not understood before. The promise had never been about staying on the ground. It had never been about denying who he was. The promise had been about coming home, about being there for her, about loving her more than anything. He had done that. Even when the sky called him back, even when everything was falling apart, he had done what he needed to do to come home. That was not breaking a promise. That was keeping one. He bent down and kissed Zoe's forehead. "Sleep tight, baby girl. Daddy's home. Daddy will always come home." Outside the window, the stars were shining. The same stars that pilots navigated by, that dreamers wished upon, that fathers pointed out to their children on clear summer nights. Marcus looked up at them for a long moment. Then he smiled, turned off the light, and went to join his family.